caregiver burnout, and really what I'm doing, and this is kind of more of my philosopher hat, I'm making an argument. And I am going to try to show you or prove to you or let you accept that self-care is just a necessary part of caregiving. And that part of self-care is taking a step back, welcoming in respite, and sometimes being there or not being there helps you be there more or more fully. That would be my thesis statement. So introductions again. Some of you probably already know me from a little bit before, but I'm a medical social worker at the Comprehensive Neuromuscular Clinic at Cincinnati Children's. Been there for going on 4 years. Had the luxury of being able to really immerse myself in the neuromuscular world. We're a large hospital, and so we're able to have that specialization. I come from a background in philosophy, as I already alluded to, and I got my master's in social work from Florida State University. And my journey to neuromuscular care and the medical world in general was at, it's part of a Serious Fun Network camps, by the way. So if you want to look up Serious Fun Network camps, they're an international group. Mine was Camp Boggy Creek in Florida, where I'm from, and it just was very impactful. There was a social worker there, pushed me into social work, and then it also made me lean more medical, which led to a clinical internship at All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I think that's a little incomplete. It should be Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital because they bought it a few years ago. And I worked in the hemophilia treatment center and really got that kind of exposure to chronic care and what long-term, really just what the perspective of a social worker in your journey is, and kind of made me start questioning what that should be. I'm here today because it made a long-lasting impact, because going on 4 years at Children's, way too much to do there to think about leaving anytime soon, unless it's in another way to help you guys. And yeah, disclosure's none. Nobody's giving me money. And so my goals for this are, again, really just kind of the foundation of my argument, because I like taking people along with the moves that I make and kind of why I say the things I do as much as possible. So I'm a stickler for definitions, so I'm going to define what burnout is, because there's a lot of misconceptions that I think lead to the stigma of it. And in doing so, I'm going to try to validate its existence. It is out there. It is not something that, you know, if you just push it away, it'll go away. It's a thing. It's a human experience. We'll get to that later, though. And as always, I want you to take home some things, so I'm going to try to offer up some strategies of how to recognize it, especially proactively, and just kind of build a system for yourselves to try to make you aware of it before it's happening. And also, I'm always going to try to give resources. Touched on Medicaid waiver a little bit earlier, but just other paths to support. And then I'm also going to provide you with usable tools to take home. And now on to what burnout means, because it is not just exhaustion. So I pulled this from the Cleveland Clinic just to get a straight definition, but I'm going to fill in a little bit of my own thoughts and explanations. So caregiver burnout is a state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. And I bold the exhaustion because that is not just being tired. As you probably know from your affected kids, fatigue means something very different to them than other kids might use it. It's not just being tired. Similarly, burnout is not just being tired. It is significant and profound exhaustion, and it has a clinical focus to it, really. And that's kind of the crux of my argument about self-care is caregiving, because it has to do with just, yeah, that exhaustion. So it occurs when caregivers don't get the help they need, and also do more than they're able to either physically or financially do. And I like to focus on that because it also shows that sometimes you're just not equipped with the tools to avoid it. It's not even something that's necessarily in your full control by virtue of the environment that you're put in and maybe can't get out of because there just isn't an off-ramp. So it's really not your fault necessarily. Well, it's never your fault. Just given, period, end of sentence. But isolation can happen because of system failings, and I think doing more than you're able to do happens because you're either feeling or physically are isolated from supports. And it can lead to kind of a sense of obligation. You do more because you just feel like you take ownership. And so this is my care, I'm the one who does it, nobody else should do it, it is my job as a parent. And that's great and awesome, but it can get to a point where it's a little bit more detrimental than it should be. And really just a whole range of reasons outside of personal fault. And so it can also be accompanied by an attitude change from positive and caring to negative and unconcerned. And so really that is just, that's your main goal. You're trying to avoid that and maintain care to stay in the green to avoid the red because it's a natural slide that you might not see coming and just for basic reasons you won't necessarily be able to control. And so delegating direct care tasks to avoid burnout, it really is sometimes the optimal or best choice if your end goal is caregiving. And so I touched on this earlier, but burnout is clinically significant. And it happens in isolation, but it is not isolated. And what that means is it can happen because you don't have the necessary supports in place, but it's such a common experience. It is such a common concern for people. And so it's a universal experience, universal concern, and I think it plays into it because you can lose focus on that when you are isolated and don't have that, or don't have the luxury of taking on that bigger perspective. And so clinically significant is actually a professional term. And so I'm gonna, again, get into definitions a little bit. Because if something's clinically significant, that means that the concerns that are identified demand intervention. That means, like, as a clinician, that means what I see is at the point where something needs to change. Some kind of intervention needs to happen. It can't sustain, needs to somehow be assisted. And so burnout is also clinically significant for social reasons and also medical reasons. I think probably a few people are familiar with the ACE score study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. It was a really large and showing study that revealed stress can have long-term health impacts. And burnout is an extension of stress. And so it can lead to fatigue, it can weaken your immune system, make you more prone to infections, and can increase the risk of poor health outcomes in general, especially with heart health. And so it's not even something to avoid just because you want to keep caregiving, it's so you can stay healthy. It's also, you have medical reasons. In a way, avoiding burnout, you need to find medicine for that. And I'm going to say that's self-care. And it really does, or clinically significant also means that it affects functioning in multiple areas of life. No. Disconnect there. So it affects functioning in multiple areas of life, like work, friends, and family. And usually, if it's something that becomes clinically significant, I argue that it means that it's also widely observed. Because as clinicians, we're not always experiencing things directly. So if something gets to the point where we notice it and then just broadly say it demands intervention, gets to the point where it's on the DSM, it means that it's a thing that's out there in the world and not something that is any kind of moral failure. It's just something that is a thing. And also, there are attempts to measure it, to really get a sense of what the scale of the issue is and also how we can address it. So then it gets that kind of formal and professional level. And so this is just a snip of the research, and I actually did use the snipping tool just to get Google Scholar searches, but you can see those numbers. Caregiver burnout, simple search, has close to 79,000 results of various papers. A lot of those are literature reviews too. Caregiver stress management, it's even more, 211,000. And something that's used that I kind of highlight down below is the Maslach Burnout Inventory was created in 1981. So this is also something that has been viewed for a long time. It is not new. And there's also a self-assessment version too. Usually you can kind of use good judgment on if it looks official, but there are some other sites that look a little more like BuzzFeed that I would probably avoid. And so I also like to justify what I say by showing that it's something that we already talk about and that it is an old social concept, just the idea of having limits. So an example from my own profession is compassion fatigue. We use it pretty much as a synonym for burnout, but I kind of understand it more as kind of a challenge for us to have an initial warning sign that burnout might be on the horizon. So as a professional, if I think that I'm experiencing compassion fatigue, that means my professional barriers between myself and the people I see are starting to break down a little bit. And so that's why it's discussed in helping professions, because I should be able to take on people's pain, emotions, get a sense of their point of view, but I also need to be able to go home at the end of the day and kind of vent them out, let them harmlessly get released into the air, so I can do it again, because that's what I want to do. So compassion fatigue is our way of kind of calling that out and just catch it before it gets to the point of burnout. But I do want to make a distinction here that it's easier for professionals to use this and think about compassion fatigue, use compassion fatigue as a thing to look out for, because it's just easier for us to avoid it in general, and it's also easier for us to back up from it. And I think our kind of descent into burnout is a little bit slower and something we can be a little bit more aware of than you can as caregivers, because we have those professional barriers to fall back on. You don't. And we have the option of not taking it home with us, even if that barrier can erode over time, but you don't. And also now self-care is just widely discussed in helping fields. I was at a social work conference, and one of the presenters asked, how many of you in grad school talked about self-care as part of your curriculum? I raised my hand and I looked around. Most people around my age or in similar aged cohorts raised their hand. Most of the people who had been practicing for a really long time kept their hands down, because it wasn't a thing that we were really talking about then. But now we're talking about it a lot because it's been observed and noted. And so I also like looking at just kind of basic examples that I think can resonate with everybody. So we use some idioms just to show that people have limits, and they're really old ones, familiar ones. And idioms, I think, are just easy, or they form because we want to be able to easily communicate universal human experiences. So if there are idioms, it probably means that it's something that a lot of people are experiencing. So, one, the straw that broke the camel's back. If you keep on piling things on, eventually it's not going to last, and the foundation's going to crumble. So you just keep adding on more, and you keep adding on more, and then you get at the end of your rope. And that's another phrase that we use just to show that at some point, there's nothing more for us. And so an example that I'm going to use, sorry, I didn't look at my original slide. I'm still on some examples of ways that we use, or that we talk about it or kind of see it, even if we don't think about it as indications of it. Because I love that song, Lean on Me by Bill Withers. Fantastic song, but it also shows sometimes you need support from others. And, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Yeah. And then there's also this idea of a breaking point. And I put breaking point in quotes because I do want to kind of break that down a little bit, because I don't think it completely applies here, because the road to burnout is a little bit more sinister than a breaking point would really imply. I think breaking point kind of gives this indication that there's this one specific point of no return that then turns into burnout, and it's just not that easy to identify, because like the camel, it's a buildup of those small stresses, those micro stresses that kind of spread over time would be manageable. So it's not that the tasks themselves are difficult necessarily, it's the tasks in the amount that they're asked in the time frame that they have to be done, which leads to just something that nobody can take on. And so I'm going to tap into the philosopher in me, because I think this is just basic logic. I think we can all agree that caregivers should avoid burnout. And then in our last slide, I tried to conclude that burnout can be avoided by somehow making more time for yourself or changing the tone of time. If it's spread out over time, then you could help, or you would be able to take it on. And so respite and self-care do help caregivers avoid burnout. And so I think the conclusion there is naturally that caregivers should use respite and practice self-care to avoid burnout. So it's really not something, or taking time for yourself is just a logical extension of caregiving. It's something that should be baked into the concept of caregiving, just giving care to yourself as a caregiver to allow you to sustain it. Because reworked, I think that conclusion is that respite and self-care is a part of caregiving. So you might be wondering how or in what ways you could really do that and actually try to avoid it. And so I'm going to try to share some proactive strategies. And I want to note, too, kind of going back, that burnout is activated on a slider and not a switch. It's a spectrum. It's kind of a back and forth. It's a needle moving back and forth. It's not just like something you turn on and off. It's not binary. It's not something that you can just, you can't say like, aha, there you go, burnout, you're caught. It doesn't work like that. So I would argue try to build up a detection system, because we're really good at adapting, humans, but sometimes if things come on slow enough, that kind of risks you just soaking up an unreasonable amount of stress over time, because you just, stress comes in, you adapt to it, you work it in, stress comes in, you do the same, repeat, until you're at the end of your rope. And it can happen without you noticing. So if you detect your emotions, you can ask yourself, are you experiencing denial about your loved one's condition? That would probably be new. If you're catching yourself a little bit in denial, what's that about? Something to explore. Do you feel anger towards the person that you're caring for? That's probably a foreign concept too. It's natural, it can happen. But again, anger is a secondary emotion, so there's probably something underlying that anger that's bringing it to the forefront. And anxiety about your caregiving responsibilities. Are you now worried about doing things that were already automatic? Because if there's a shift in that, then that could be notable and could be important, and it would be something to kind of reflect on, and especially if you're feeling depressed or anxious. And so also, check in with your body. Are you feeling more exhausted than usual? Do you not have the normal amounts of energy? Do you have trouble falling asleep or staying asleep? Do you have difficulty concentrating now? And then also check on your behaviors, because maybe you're withdrawing from your friends or social activities that you enjoy, and that, again, kind of leads to that isolation, where maybe one stress means you cut out like one part of something that normally kind of fills you back up. And if that's temporary, it's fine, but if that doesn't come back, then that means you're just going to be continually depleting, and you're going to continue to be emptied without that opportunity to fill yourself back up. And so are you having trouble controlling yourself emotionally or physically? Because that self-control is a big kind of, I guess, dam, so to speak, just between the expression and what you're feeling. And then, have you been using alcohol, drugs, or smoking more than you feel you should? Again, it's fine if you do. That's a way of coping. It only becomes a problem if it's clinically significant, or if it's to the point where you can't step back from it, or if it starts catching you unaware, because that probably means that your body's automatically responding to things that your mind's not fully aware of. And so there is this interplay between your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors. You can kind of start anywhere, but if I think something, it's probably going to make me feel a certain way, and then we're emotional beings, and so we act on our emotions on some way, and this sets up really nicely into the cognitive behavioral triangle. Some of you might be familiar with CBT. It's a pretty widely used therapeutic intervention for depression and anxiety and also anger. And this triangle is kind of what the whole theory and also the whole intervention is built on, this interplay between our thoughts, feelings, and our behaviors. And CBT is widely used and taught because it's pretty quick, it's effective, and one of my favorite things is just explaining it. A fancy way of putting that is providing psychoeducation. Sometimes that can be enough to just nip it in the bud, because if you're just aware of how this affects you, if you start thinking about yourself on these terms, then you kind of start to establish what's normal, like what's that cycle look like normally, and then alternatively, is there something different happening from that normal? And then the next steps are why, what's happening, is it something in my situation, and just hopefully sheds light on whatever is kind of creating that disconnect from your normal baseline. And cycles also don't have to be broken all the time. That's another thing about CBT in general. Sometimes they just need a shake or just kind of a quick pause to either get you back to normal or kind of flag that maybe you need to reach out to somebody and get help. But just bouncing a little bit out of that triangle can kind of give you perspective on how to break that cycle, well, or just get off of it. And so a universal example of that, this is a little bit of self-disclosure. I get really hangry. Hunger affects me a lot. I just get a lot snappier than I normally am, definitely more irritable. I like to think of myself as a patient person with a very long rope, but if I'm hungry, that is just like, the rope's about this big. It's maybe like a Chinese finger trap kind of length. And so I know that I'm hangry. If somebody calls me out that I'm hangry and that like, oh, you're being more irritable than usual, I can take a step back because that just jolts me out of this kind of natural feeling process that I'm just sort of sucked into. And it makes me realize like, I am hangry. Maybe I should go get something to eat. And so you can see that that jolt immediately makes somebody go from just kind of running through this natural process to suddenly think like, oh, solution-oriented. How do I fix this? And it's something that you can't always do yourself. And so that is why sharing the signs with others is a good call. Share the CBT triangle, share the signs of burnout. If you have friends, family members, just anybody who really knows you, pretty much, because you don't have to go it alone. Something that I always try to think about whenever I don't know, share a resource or anything is what work am I putting on you guys? Because you guys have so much to do. So if there's anything that somebody else can take off of your plate, that's great. And so maybe they can be your detection system and you can kind of recruit them to your cause to kind of alert you to what you're feeling based on their knowledge of you. Like they think that you're kind of acting a little bit off. So really the challenge for you would be to just accept that, because getting told what you're feeling isn't always fun, but sometimes it's accurate and needed. And so just challenge yourself to really listen if somebody alerts and then speak up if any of those signs really hit close to home. Like if you're seeing yourself in this with burnout, that is, I think, significant and something to be reviewed with somebody who knows you or even clinic staff if that's appropriate. Because burnout is something that we should avoid. And so I think things are a lot easier to accept and remember when they're kind of fun. So I overthought this a little bit because I'm gonna propose that you set up your alarm system, but alarm stands for something, which is allies looking for abnormal responses and mannerisms system. And so this would pretty much be a label for specific people, and very much in that, like, don't just say like, hey guys, watch out for me. Like pick certain people, you, this friend, look out for me. Conversation should be more detailed than that, but just be specific. And they pretty much just get licensed to tell you how you feel. And again, that's pretty much anybody who knows you or interacts with you regularly. Really the most important part of this and who that is is they know when you're feeling different. And in order to know different, you need to know same. So they need to know you. And it can be situation-based, but it's not out of the realm of possibility that you could work your loved one into that, even if they're your affected loved one. Because honestly, they might be eager to tell you what you're feeling and kind of call you out on things. And it also just kind of reinforces that partnership in care, because you're not their employee, you're their parent, and so there is always going to be a partnership, even if it's direct caregiving. And also more practically, if you're close to burnout, that can affect your loved ones. And so giving them agency and kind of avoiding that is also maybe just appropriate. Depends on age, depends on situations. I'll always defer to your judgment at the end of this, so this is not any kind of prescription or anything like that. But it also means that changes in their behavior could also be them reflecting back changes in you. So if they're starting to act different, just another kind of question or if they're reacting differently to things that you would otherwise expect one reaction, that could be because you're a little bit off base without realizing it. I usually like to think, like, if something really strange happens, one of the first questions should be why. And so, mentioned before that burnout is kind of this accumulation of small stresses, and so I think it naturally follows that small recoveries can also kind of help keep it away. Sometime, I talk about this also with young adults with goal setting. Goals don't have to be big. It doesn't have to be this huge impactful moment where everybody's cheering your name and everything. A goal could just be learn the names of my medications. Actually, those are tough words, so that might be kind of tough. But yeah, goals don't have to be small. Or small goals are still important, and also small recoveries can still be really important, because those can also build up over time. So some that I thought of are practicing mindfulness. And this leads for a reason, so I'm going to go on a little bit of a speech about mindfulness. Because mindfulness is challenging yourself to be present in the moment and taking on kind of a non-judgmental posture to your feelings. And the ultimate goal or kind of idea is you're experiencing the feelings, but you're not really absorbing them. You're noticing, you're aware, but you're not being completely impacted. So it kind of lets you take on this almost internal third-person sense of self to kind of see what's going on with you, but without an additional judgment. So not kicking yourself for anything. I would say praise yourself for things. So maybe just negative things. And so some examples of that could be like body scans, breathing exercises, meditation is one of the common ones. So an example of one is like senses. So whatever senses you can kind of locate and pin down in your body, just take time and just think of 3 or whatever number of things that you're just sensing from those senses, and just kind of note them and feel them and move on. You're just kind of taking stock of that moment. You're being present. And so the goal is to practice recognizing the emotions without them taking the driver's seat. It's another way of summing it up. But the reason why I lead with mindfulness is you can really start practicing any time. It's not something that requires training necessarily. It might take some practice to get a little better at, or turn into a routine, but presumably somebody could be practicing mindfulness as I'm talking, which is perfectly fine, no offense. And also there are just so many examples of exercises from mindfulness that you're bound to find one that you like. Google search, Bing, whatever search engine you use, if you use one, can probably lead to something that you would be okay with. And it's also something that you can teach to your loved one, and that could be affected, unaffected, regardless, because this helps anyone for any situation. And that's another reason why I like it, because it's a broad recommendation that can then be taken and applied to specific individual context. But also there's a growing body of evidence that if you practice mindfulness enough and go through these kind of steps enough, then there are measurable changes in your brain structure. just in how your brain is connected to itself. And I like to point that out, and I could probably do a whole presentation just on mindfulness to really give you the data and the backing up, but there's a growing body of evidence for that. And it also can be practiced around others, so you don't even have to leave the room. So sometimes there's this, I get locked into it too, thinking that if I am there giving care or if I am with somebody else, then that is kind of taking away from me. But if somebody else can be in the room when you're trying to practice mindfulness. And so even if you're kind of giving care, if there's just 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever, to yourself to just kind of go through a body scan, something like that, that can be one small sort of recovery that just helps. And plan treats for yourself. I really like this too. And that's just working something that you like to do into your day. Again, no matter how small. But I always encourage scheduling it because you're pulled in so many different directions that if it's not on the books, it's probably not going to be on your mind come time. I don't know if that rhymed, it wasn't on purpose. But yeah, schedule it because you might not remember and you need to take time for yourself because caregiving requires self-care because self-care is part of caregiving. So that could be like listening to a particular song. Maybe it's one that you belt out in the car. Maybe it's one that's just like emotional. Because I know sometimes songs, even if they're sad, it's more like you're releasing your negative energy into the song and into the radio waves where they go out and it's no longer in your body. And that's great. Only a song. Reading a chapter of a book, if you're a reader, sometimes that also helps us kind of come and be present in the moment, just because you're taking time to think about other things. Escapism, whatever your books are. And then maybe wear clothes that you feel more confident in. A longer shower. I don't know if I'm grasping at straws now. You could be, just be silly alone too. Sometimes caregiving can be like really serious, and it is. Like it's a serious responsibility, but especially with those blurred lines, like it can be silly and fun too. It could be with the affected, could be having fun and being silly with somebody else. But also mindfulness helps, going back to mindfulness helps us recognize those moments too, because those might naturally happen already, but you don't really think of that in the context of like, oh, this is kind of a little bit of recovery for my soul. And so maybe you have a scientific mind, and then that goes back to the Maslow, I might be mispronouncing that, burnout inventory. You can find this online there, and it's a self-scale, so you can take it on your own. I just know some people have more concrete thinking minds and maybe want their own data points. Would just caution that it's not diagnostic. It would just be a tool for you to use however you see fit. It's not telling you anything. It's only telling you what you're telling yourself. And also schedule carefree time. And that's, I guess, a little bit of a pun, but just time, again, that's not directed towards care, where that's not the focus of the interaction, where, the disability is always going to be there, but it doesn't mean that it has to drive the tone of that moment. So just quality time outside of care, and also quality time can be built into caregiving, because if you're directing what happens in the day, maybe there's a time where it's like, I don't care what you want to do. We're listening to this song, and you're going to watch me belt it out because I need this. That's fine. And I noted for myself, but I got there naturally. But it bears repeating. Mindfulness can help illuminate those moments and really let you take them in and soak in the comfort that they could offer and that you might otherwise miss. And then also there's some bigger recoveries, therapy. Again, I always recommend therapy, very biased there, but letting somebody else kind of sift through your emotions, untangle them for you, can really just leave you with a sense of clarity. There's also family support groups out there. Always encourage talking to others. I can stay up here, talk ad nauseum, but it comes down to experience. And I don't have that. That's a natural limitation, and which is why I always defer to you. So I'm approaching this with confidence, but I am listening to you guys with humility, and that's where you guys come into. Also unofficial respite care, school, kids are away. You might be at work, but then that kind of leads to baking in some maybe recoveries in the work environment. Summer camps, big fan of summer camps. They're out there. Might be kind of tough to find, but Serious Fun Network camps is one. Muscular Dystrophy Association runs some. And if you have a clinical team, they might know of some that they refer to as well. Oh, and then I also had conferences down there as well, because this could be respite. So past the respite, in terms of actual resources, yeah, this is a lot to go through. Okay, so agencies and programs. Those here is used as who delivers the services or operates the programs. And then there are also community guides, which I consider more as helpful people who can kind of show you the way, but they're not going to be providing those services directly. But they can kind of make things easier and at minimum tell you or make you confident that if I'm putting energy into this, it is actually worth it. And so in general, these names, by the way, should be used as search terms because states just have different names for the same things. Makes my job very fun, very interesting. That's only partially sarcastic. And disability services, for example, Department of Disability Services are a state office, so they do exist in every state. But like Ohio's, where I practice, is Department of Disability Service, so it's DDS, and it has its own website, DODD. And then Tennessee, where we're at, it's disability services kind of housed under the Department of Human Services. So it doesn't have its own website, but if you go to the Department of Human Services, then there's a tab that leads you to disability services. So sometimes it can be just a few steps away from those main state websites. And yeah, just finding these resources can be difficult too. And so asking, using community guides can be just great because names just don't cross state lines and it's unreasonable for people to know everything and every single name and all of the letters and acronyms involved in the science and the care and the aspect and the social aspects. It's just a lot to take in. And so I do want to touch on waiver here too, the Medicaid waiver, because I think of it as kind of the bread and butter of the neuromuscular community and think of it as Medicaid plus, with that plus being that it helps pay for more things and gives more supports. And there is more to it, but that's kind of a good summary. And while I'm here and we're in Tennessee, if you live in Tennessee, there's the Katie Beckett waiver. It has two parts. It has a great website, one of the more self-explanatory ones, has challenges when it comes to the actual services. And then there's also for adults an Employment and Community First Choices program, which looks like a waiver program, and it's more designed for kind of vocational help with employment, jobs, post-secondary education, and kind of transition into adulthood. But it gives additional supports and also guides for that. But with the agencies and programs, I am gonna kind of read out loud a little bit. Age and disabled centers can help sometimes, especially when it comes to respite care. Something that I think is kind of unfair to the community is that sometimes the services are advertised or broadcasted more under the label of services for the elderly, even if they also include younger people with developmental disabilities. So sometimes those services can be kind of hidden in age and disabled centers, area offices on aging, council on aging, and then centers for independent living options. They also go by various names, but that can be a search term, and they help with independent living, what that means, but it doesn't have to be independent living. They can also just help with whatever your goals are, and oftentimes these places are really good referral sources as well, so even if they can't help you, they can kind of point you in the direction of somebody who can, and I think that's always valuable. And then in terms of community guides, the ARC, there's an ARC chapter in every state. So if you search ARC of and then enter in your state, you can probably find the office. They, again, vary by state with what they offer. Sometimes they are a little bit more skewed towards intellectual disabilities, but there's a possibility that they also cover more developmental disabilities that don't impact cognition. Muscular Dystrophy Association is a great resource. Diagnosis-specific agencies, like all the ones that put on this conference, can also help. Medical social workers, and really just anybody who's helpful, just go ahead and ask. Because if I don't know the answer to something, that bugs me, and then I want to find out. Or if I don't know, maybe I know somebody who does because I'm already in that system of people who do these kinds of things. So I might just have a better impression of where you could be funneled to. So you just don't have to take that on yourself all the time. And yeah, the worst case scenario too is if you ask somebody a question and they don't know, then you're just in the exact same situation before the question, so you didn't really lose or gain anything. But if they do know how to help, then you might gain something. So it's just a really simple practice to think, like, if I have this need, anytime you interface with somebody who's just seems generally helpful and maybe in the know, just like ask them. Because worst case scenario, they don't know, or you might benefit from it. You just don't know until you ask. Also, conferences like this are full of helpful people, so I'm imagining like coming in with just a list of questions, like, I need respite care, how do I get it? And you just interview everybody. Maybe not to that degree, but there's probably a happy medium. Yeah, so some tips. Use contact forms on websites. I was really surprised at how responsive they are. Sometimes I'm just like looking something up and then I have a question, and even before I look it up, maybe I could Google it myself, but I don't have to. I just shoot off the question in one of their online forms. Delegate when possible. Again, helpful people might be able to take on some of that like burden of figuring out what to do. Schedule time, again, bake it into your schedule for calls or exploring the internet. I just went back on accident. And then, yeah, I always like giving some useful websites. And I'm going to run through these. So kidswaivers.org has a good breakdown of waivers for any state. There's a list drop-down menu. It's pretty intuitive. So if you go to there, they also link directly to the websites. Most of my knowledge, most of emails that I send about waiver, any information I know is usually just parsing it together after they lead me there. State Disability Office Locator, so if you don't know what your disability office is called, that can help you find it. Again, it's just a kind of a hub and a directory. That is also a directory, but it's for the community living things, so that's more transition skills, everything like that. And then also psychologytoday.com is a therapy mental health finder. Lots of tabs to make sure that they take your insurance or specialize in something that you're kind of thinking of. Also kind of gives photos of them so you can kind of get an initial sense of their vibe. And then this was going to initially be a little bit heavier, but because of time, I'm going to have to go through it. So bringing up and bringing in respite, I mean talking about it and then implementing it in practice. So normalizing it, just talking about how you need a break. Communicate openly. So when you're young, you really set the tone of what things mean and what emotional weight they carry. So if you're open about it, that can demonstrate that it's not something to worry about. Because kids do have a tendency of starting at acceptance and working from there. And another way of putting this is respite is medicine. And medicine's important to take. That's probably what you're trying to teach them. Self-care, respite care, that's your medicine. Or it helps you help them. Could be another way of just kind of saying it. Also shows that you're still a team. Like, I am still there to help you, but this is how I can do that. Collaborate. I'm already getting ahead of myself. So collaborate. If they're adolescent or older, depends on if they're developmentally appropriate. You could explain it clearly or say the things above with bigger words in more detail. So consider that a break might sound fantastic to your loved one, because maybe they want some time away from you and on their own, so you can kind of plan the breaks together. And if they're not eager, then collaborating with them still gives them that agency and that voice. You can be firm on the need for it is what I would push, but be sensitive to the delivery of that. And then, yeah, build into practicing independence. So a break from you also means that they get to practice and kind of just skills in talking to other people that they don't normally get to exercise. Because I hear that Practice or working with non-family members feels very different than working with family members based on kind of how you're understood. Again, it's just a different kind of relationship because it's more employee-employer based. And then also you can always be present to talk about the experiences and kind of what that was like afterwards. And it opens opportunities to talk about what their future goals are if you want to frame it into you want to go to college, well, you're going to need to learn this. So while I'm away taking care of myself, you should work on doing this. And then I did want to talk about the B word that sometimes happens, which is burden. And that, by this I mean your affected loved one feeling like they're a burden on you. And this kind of ties back a little bit into the sibling presentation I just gave, but feeling like a burden can just happen. And it can be okay, even if it's not a great feeling. And so approach it by age just for an open dialogue. I would say around like 0 to 13 or so. Normalize the break and make a good point of just using expressions of caring, like saying you miss them, you love them. Be really eager to have them tell you what happened while you were away. Just kind of like get back into their world somehow, if that's your concern. And early teens is kind of judgment territory about how they would take it, just hormones everywhere. And then mid-teens and above is where you'd probably be looking more at a direct and open conversation. Still depends on if you feel like they can really communicate themselves or if you're comfortable with it too, because you don't want to enter into any danger zone. And I do hear the feeling like a burden in a lot of lines of thinking when I talk to patients. So it is a thing and it is okay, it's natural, unless it gets to the point where it's clinically significant. And really, I also like to think about like which is more likely, that them feeling like a burden is a sign that you failed as a parent or as a caregiver, or if it's a sign that your loved one is a considerate and thoughtful person because they're thinking about what they mean to other people in the world. That's taking on perspectives, that's kind of a maladaptive way of expressing empathy and compassion. So don't be afraid to ask if like what taking respite really means to them to start that conversation. Just make sure you're prepared for it. You could always talk to somebody else to practice it, your own therapist maybe. Find your own words to communicate it too, because I think the language that we use for ourselves helps us kind of get a sense of what they feel like a bit better. So like the alarm system, if you have like a different silly way of putting it, have fun with that, just whatever works for you. And sometimes I think building your own labels for things really helps, or just your quick ways of like expressing your feelings. Or tell them that I told you to take a break and that it's my fault. So I can be the bad guy. And thank you.